So now it is my pleasure to welcome Lily Bermel for the opening speech. You are with the US Department of State. You are an advisor in the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate and the Office of Global Change at the US Department of State. You're working mainly on capacity development and mitigation negotiations at the UNFCCC, and it's a pleasure to have you here. And before you joined the UNFCCC, here the negotiations and the Department of State, you also advised the Kingdom of Tonga, and you also have been working in one of the federal states in the US. Yeah, so you will set the scene. Floor is yours, Lily.
Sure. Thank you very much for that introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. I know we're all methane enthusiasts to be here, so I hope not to repeat too much of what you already know. But today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the genesis of the Global Methane Pledge, the science behind it, its very crucial connectivity to energy security, and then also its connection to the COP and the broader UNFCCC process. So as in the introduction stated, I'm part of the climate team at the U.S. Department of State, which is currently being led by Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, and we are all very passionate about climate in the SPEC office. So we know that the science is really clear, that reducing methane emissions is critical to limiting warming to 1.5 with limited overshoot. And the Global Methane Pledge is really something that put methane on the global spotlight for climate action. As was stated, the U.S. and the EU announced the Global Methane Pledge at the World Leaders Summit back in November. And we actually, back when this was started, it was almost a napkin idea. And so back in August, just a few months before, we had just started with just about 8 countries. And then by September, we grew to 32. And by October, we were nearing the 110 that we announced at COP. And so right now, we've gained more members, and pretty soon there's going to be an announcement of a new tranche of endorsers, which is really exciting. So we know that methane comes from primarily 3 sources. Agriculture, fossil fuel leaks, and waste have contributed 0.5 degrees of Celsius warming, global warming to date, which is about half of the global warming that's occurred. Achieving the Global Methane Pledge collective goal of reducing methane emissions 30% by 2030 could reduce warming by at least 0.2 degrees Celsius by 2050. And this is a really critically important fact, not only because of the avoided warming potential by achieving this collective goal, but because of the short-term impact that it has. This is 0.2 degrees Celsius of warming this decade. And so not only does that avoid warming, right, but it opens the door to allow for more time for more sustained reductions in carbon dioxide. Cutting methane emissions in line with that can also reduce peak levels of warming, avert tipping points, and reduce global adaptation burdens, all while alleviating climate impacts. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, estimates that achieving the Global Methane Pledge would prevent more than 8 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions from reaching the atmosphere annually by 2030. So it is pretty clear from that methane mitigation is regarded as the single most effective strategy to limiting warming and keeping the global goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. And it also has co-benefits in improving public health and agricultural productivity. So specifically, achieving the Global Methane Pledge each year could prevent 170,000 premature deaths, 510,000 asthma-related hospital visits, 48 billion hours of lost labor from extreme heat, and 17 million tons of crop losses globally. So that 0.2 degrees Celsius really makes a difference. Yet at the same time, the world is reaching record high concentrations of methane, and emissions, as we know, are still increasing at record speed. So it's going to take all of our efforts to bend this curve, slow the rate of emissions increase, and achieve that methane reductions in line with the Global Methane Pledge. I wanted to address its connection to energy security because it presents a really key and important opportunity that we can take advantage of given all the changing global events, but also this Africa COP that's upcoming. So methane emissions from the oil and gas sector are actually the cheapest to abate because the sector has among the fastest and most cost-effective solutions that are presently available today to reduce methane. The IEA estimates that nearly half of all methane emissions in the oil and gas sector can be abated at no net cost. No net cost. This is because the value of the captured methane could cover the abatement costs. So essentially, instead of increasing production to meet energy demands or to offset one country's fossil fuels, we can capture the methane that's getting released, and then you reduce emissions, you have more gas to use, and you're not increasing production, you're not increasing emissions. And if you deploy renewables as well, that's another way to offset natural gas. In fact, the total volume of flared gas globally is equal to the amount of gas that the EU imports from Russia. So I'll say that again. The total volume of flared gas, that's wasted gas and all of those methane emissions, is equal to the amount of gas that the EU imports from Russia. So capturing all of this flared, vented, and leaked methane is a true prize. It reduces methane, as I said, and it doesn't increase production. And so if we focus specifically on Europe and North Africa, almost as a case study and a really key opportunity, you recognize the climate, the energy, and the economic benefits from this. And so for Egypt, our office has estimated that their gas that gets flared, vented, and leaked is equivalent to about 1/3 of their gas exports. And then at the current EU gas import prices, if we capture all of that gas, it could be worth over $4 billion in annual revenue. And then at the same time, this can go towards Europe. And also, this is pretty on the easier end to do because many of the pipelines in North Africa have spare capacity. Some of these pipelines only operate at about a 50% utilization rate. So this gives space for very commercially attractive projects, which is something that we're in conversation with the government of Egypt about, and is clearly a key thing going forward. So this shows that energy security is a complement to climate action, and it's definitely not an alternative, and it's a way to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. And then I also just wanted to kind of wrap it up by connecting the Global Methane Pledge, but more methane action, to the UNFCCC process writ large. In our office, we kind of joke about how there's two COPs. There's the COP and the COP. One of those is the negotiations that goes on and the more formal process, and the other is the action-forcing, really media, public-facing event that happens around the COP. And so both of these can connect to the COP. And so kind of what I just outlined when it comes to the North Africa-Europe opportunity and the energy security opportunity with methane is really important to capitalize on, because this is an Africa COP. And with that public-facing event, we can really show that energy security and climate go hand in hand and are really not conflicting at all. So that's on that end. And when it comes to the other COP, the negotiations COP, there's kind of two key opportunities where it relates, and it gets a little bit technical, but I assume you guys are interested. But the first is under the Paris Transparency and Reporting Framework. So back at COP24, we finished the MRV, the Monitoring, Reporting, and Verification Guidelines, and then at COP26, we figured out how to operationalize it. And basically what that means is that all countries under the Paris Agreement are required to submit the same tables for inventories for their greenhouse gases, and methane is one of those 7 gases. So for some countries, the GMP is actually the first opportunity that they have to take significant action on methane policy-wise in the domestic or international space. And so obviously a first step to doing that is having your inventories and having your reporting in line. And so parties are first required to submit these inventories by 2024, and this is just a wonderful first step to kind of get everyone on board and able to take action on methane, whether or not they're signed on to the GMP. And then secondly, and then last note before I wrap up, is there's a new mitigation work program that COP26 authorized, and it's quite nascent, but its mandate is to urgently scale up mitigation ambition and implementation in this critical decade. So I've been participating in those negotiations this session, and so parties are still debating, its scope, its modalities, the topics it should take up. But if done right, essentially, it's a really key opportunity to standardize best practices for mitigation, ambition, and implementation. And so surely, as I've outlined today, methane is exactly one of those best practices. So we hope to see something advanced in that space, but that will come next year once the work program is actually launched. So just to conclude, thank you for listening, but I know you guys all know that it's critical to act on methane as it works for the energy, development, climate agendas, basically everything. And so we really can't afford to wait to take really fast and urgent action. And the Global Methane Pledge is obviously a key avenue to do that. So thank you for all of your work that you guys contribute, and to the panelists as well. And I'll hand it back over to you, and looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Lily.